Hello, I'm Dango Rose. Welcome to the Mountaineer Podcast, where everybody's listening. The Mountaineer brings you the latest news of the Peak to Peak region, in print, online, through our podcast, social media, and special publications. Now, listen in to the latest news of the area with our local journalists.
The song that you are currently listening to is called Last Cigarette. It's the debut single from Bridget Spinney, and it is currently available wherever you get your music. Bridget Spinney will be coming to perform live at UC Brews, located at 70 East 1st Street in Nederland on Sunday, May 11th, 2025, starting at 2 p.m. To learn more about Bridget and her music, be sure to head to her Instagram at Bridget_Spinney. Hello there, everybody. My name is Jamie Lammers, and welcome to the Mountaineer Podcast, where today I'm bringing you the second of 3 local poetry spotlights, transitioning from National Poetry Month, April, into May. Before we get into today's episode, though, I've got some preliminary announcements. If you're interested in subscribing to the Mountaineer and getting news about the Peak to Peak area of Colorado, then be sure to head to the mtnear.com and click on the subscribe button in the top right corner of our homepage. From there, you'll get full access to our digital archives and scanned copies of our physical newspaper, as well as the option to send a physical subscription to your mailbox or to the mailbox of someone that you love. If you're interested in getting advertising into the paper and or the podcast, then be sure to email our editor-in-chief, Barbara Hart, at info@themountaineer.com and or myself at media@themountaineer.com, and we'll get something sorted for you. Also, be sure to email us if you're interested in being involved in the podcast in any way. We're currently looking for more voices and DJs to join us for our current season 5. So be sure to email info@themountaineer.com and media@themountaineer.com if you're interested in getting involved. And finally, here are some regular promotional announcements brought to you by the Mountaineer.
Looking for a unique advertising opportunity? The Mountaineer Podcast may be a perfect fit for you. Our podcast reaches local listeners at least 3 days each week. We can create your podcast commercial for you, or you can submit your own. Contact Amanda McDonald for additional information. Her email is adsales@themountaineer.com, and her cell is 720-960-2900. Have you checked out the Mountaineer YouTube lately? We are very excited to have a videographer intern this spring, as well as Clementine Miller, who's been working hard to record some of our local events and meetings to share with you. Go check it out on the Mountaineer YouTube. Have you seen our 2024 Peak to Peak Visitors Guide? We have just launched our 2025 Media Kit for the next guide. Go to our website and click on Advertise to see the full media kit there. Spring is springing, and we all know that means the flowers will be popping out all over the place, reminding us of beautiful art. That also means it's time to start thinking about the 2025 studio tour. Go to our website and click on special sections to view the 2024 guide and prepare yourself for this year's edition.
All right, now let's get into today's Poetry Spotlight. Our guest today, do you mind introducing yourself real quick?
Sure. I'm Christine Weeber, and I've lived in Gilpin County for, 20 years now. And I'm a poet, writer. I'm an editor for an anthropology magazine called Sapiens. It's free. It's an online magazine where we translate anthropology for public audience. So it's sapiens.org. And I'm also a healer. So I do shamanic healing, and I use an office part-time in Nederland.
And when did you settle into the Peak to Peak area in Colorado, and why did you decide that it was the right place for you?
Well, when I was in graduate school for my degree in anthropology, I actually moved into a house that was full of toxic mold, and I got very ill. And so I moved from there to a rental that had room deodorizers in every room, and I totally crashed. And so in 2005, we decided to just get up out of town where there are so many toxins and pesticides and diesel, et cetera, et cetera. And so we decided to come up to the mountains and build a healthy home. And so my house is non-toxic and green. I tested everything that was used in it, and it's been the place that I've healed. So that was my initial sort of kick in the butt to get up here. And then this has been the place where I felt most at home on the planet. And so I'm in a way grateful for that path. It's been pretty difficult in many ways, but I'm actually working with some friends to publish a book on healthy home building. And so I just recently finished my chapter. So hopefully that'll be out in a few years. And so that was the initial, impetus. And then I have just completely settled in. I don't even have words for it. But as we all know, the longer you live up here, the more you just feel connected. And I love this place so much, and the people. And there's a totally different sensibility. I grew up in a big city. I grew up in Grand Rapids, Michigan, in the Midwest. And so a completely different feel up here, and just resonated, felt like home. Yeah.
And how long have you been writing poetry or writing in general?
Well, let's see. I wrote my first play when I was in 4th grade, and my friends and I performed it and charged our neighbors 5 cents, to come and see it. So I guess that was my first breakout performance. And I started writing poetry when I was 16. So I guess it's been 38 years now. And I just feel like I already think in my day-to-day life, I already kind of operate and think in terms of poems. And I'm always translating myself for normal dialogue. And so when I found poetry, I guess it was a home. It just felt like, here are people who think and speak and operate in the world in a similar way as I already do, and felt like kind of an outsider. So
do you still write in mediums outside of poetry as well?
Yeah, I do. I've always written essays, fiction. I guess like a lot of people have a novel in the drawer that I've been working on for a long time. My partner and I right now are writing a children's story that's based here. And so we have some local characters in it. We have the carousel animals. We have Winks Lodge ancestors from Lincoln Hills. And it's set in the mountains on the high country. And so we almost have a solid first draft of that ready, and we're looking for an illustrator. So yes, I consider myself a writer who just writes, whatever comes to me. I have a lot of projects in the works. I just recently, in these times right now, been working on a manifesto and a number of other projects. So my list is always long.
Well, out of all the writing mediums, what especially keeps you coming back to poetry?
I think the nugget for me, maybe the compass, is that poetry, I feel, of all the genres, can hold paradox and complexity in a way that you can't quite reach, I feel like, in prose and linear written sentences. And so having your stanzas on a page and being able to work with the white space, but also diction and syntax and all the elements that you think about when you're considering writing and revising a poem. For me, it just resonates out, a drop of a poetry stanza in a lake, for me, resonates way out. It can hit on so many notes that are kind of beyond simply like a linear, rational take on our shared reality and on the world.
And are there any particular influences that have stuck out to you over the years?
I have, like most people, probably more influences than I could possibly name, right? People's work just sinks into you, and it's like this deep well that you draw from over time. But my first love, the first poet that I felt absolutely in love with, was Theodore Roethke, and he too was a Michigan poet, and so I related to him at that level. But also, he just has energized poems, and he goes deeply. So I can give you an example. It's easier just to read a poem than to talk about it. In a dark time, Theodore Roethke. In a dark time, the eye begins to see. I meet my shadow in the deepening shade. I hear my echo in the echoing wood, a lord of nature weeping to a tree. I live between the heron and the wren, beasts of the hill and serpents of the den. What's madness but nobility of soul at odds with circumstance? The day's on fire. I know the purity of pure despair. My shadow pinned against a sweating wall. That place among the rocks, is it a cave or winding path? The edge is what I have. A steady storm of correspondences, a night flowing with birds, a ragged moon, and in broad day the midnight come again. A man goes far to find out who he is. Death of the self in a long, tearless night. All natural shapes blazing unnatural light. Dark, dark my light, and darker my desire. My soul, like some heat-maddened summer fly, keeps buzzing at the sill. Which eye is I? A fallen man, I climb out of my fear. The mind enters itself, and God the mind. And one is one, free in the tearing wind. So he had a huge influence on me. I was part of this, back then it was called forensics, where I performed poetry, but other people were doing monologues from plays or that kind of thing. We competed. And so I performed one of his poems, A Meditation on Oyster River. I think I was a junior in high school, and I won 4th in state. So I read a lot of biographies about him. I read his letters. I read a lot of his poetry. And I got to a point where I actually could feel sort of as if I was embodying him. And that was really my first experience of that. I was feeling like this is an ancestral tie.
So wait, when you performed that whole poem, did you memorize it as well?
I did, and yeah, Meditation on Oyster River is quite a long poem, and it's a quiet poem. And so there were other students who performed, like Casey at the Bat, and these more really dramatic poems that in that way were compelling. And I just resonated with this poem, which is very slow. It's a meditation. It's like quiet along the water, and all these different aspects come out through the poem. But that was really my first deep dive, and we had a coach, like a forensics coach, who was just wonderful and turned me on to poetry more generally. So
it sounds like in general you gravitate towards the slow meditative kind of poetry. What sticks out to you about this kind of poetry?
For me, I think in our culture in particular, it's a real struggle to just slow down. But I feel like there's an incredible amount of power and strength by rooting ourselves to the planet, rooting ourselves to trees, getting to know the animals, the birds. And so for me, my poems often come from that space of connectivity, of being really awake and aware of our environment up here, going into the higher mountains and just laying down in the tundra for hours. Those are the spaces where my poems often come from. And so I think, to me, it feels like Tai Chi. I'm just thinking there's sort of that hum. I want my poems to embody that life force energy. And some of them, I hope, are like lightning, and it might sneak up on you. And so they're quiet, maybe, but I hope that they have an energetic, positive impact.
And how has the peak-to-peak area in general inspired your writing over the years?
I could read another poem for you, one of mine. So this is from my first collection called Sestrugi, which is a Russian word for wind-carved snow, which we all know very well. And this is called Prayer Winds. Consider the path where rose hips offer themselves to us at river's edge, and brook trout scout serene pools, moving between shadow and sun. Consider how we climb slick, snow-packed trail. Witness trees, lodgepole pine, ponderosa pine, white-trunked aspen. Break into wide valley where browned grasses hum and wind-blown ponderosa and limber pines squat and twist and give themselves to that which the divide delivers from her wind-swept spine, where snow plumes rise like weathered prayer flags for you, for me, for this aged limber pine, half-circled trunk wrapping glacial boulder, in protest, in resignation. So that's how, yeah.
And I assume that the connection that people can find in nature, if they just take a second, is one of the big things you hope people will take away when they read your poetry.
Yeah, and even in the city, I hope that during the pandemic, people started doing that, connecting to the trees right in their front yards, or the birds that were migrating through, or just sitting and noticing the clouds. And I feel like humanity's off track. We are the only hominin left of many hominins over time. And we're in a very delicate situation on the planet. And I feel like our way through is to really connect to Earth, the whole web of life, and to see ourselves as part of it rather than separate. And so in my poems, I try to create a world. I see poems as being about world building and creating spaces. And I hope that my poems are big enough. They kind of encompass enough of the whole cosmos to help give a different perspective on our human wounds, our wounds to the planet, the trauma that is going on all around us all the time. So this extreme position that we're in, right, as the human species. I hope my poems can be like a huge encompassing sense of what's all around us, not just the immediate environment, but also way out into the cosmos. And I've written 2 long poems about the recent comets and spent the most recent one, A3, I spent, I think, 10 nights out just spending time with the comet. So I try to really have an expansive sensibility and, I guess, purview in my poems where it's not just about humans. I guess as a socio-political commentary, I feel like one of our biggest problems is human supremacy, where we think that we're top rather than viewing ourselves as being part of a whole web of life that's and interdependent. So yeah, I don't really set out with that intention, but that's my underlying sensibility.
And you mentioned at the beginning of this interview that you also work for an online journal called Sapiens. How have you connected your poetic experiences to your work in Sapiens?
For me, I guess, thinking about my poetics, which I was just sort of hinting at in the prior answer, and looking at what I do at Sapiens, I'm the poetry editor there as well as the copy editor and the fact checker. And as a poetry editor, I love engaging with other people's poetic sensibilities, and I work with people from all over the world. And so when we're talking about their work, I learn so much from them. And I often there are a number of anthropologists who are sort of reaching for poetry as a way to express their fieldwork, their findings, their own emotional embodied experiences that might not fit into a professional journal article. And so I'll sit with them and talk with them about their visions for what they're looking for and trying to express themselves in poetry. And often I start those conversations by asking, what poets do you read? Like, bring 3 poems to me. And most of the time I've never heard of these poets. So it's incredibly enriching for me. I think we can get a bit myopic around our own artistic expressions. And so to reach out and understand, like Aga Shahid Ali from Kashmir, or there's a woman in southern Italy who turned me on to a few other new poets that I hadn't heard of. And the other issue is translation. I feel like a lot more could happen in terms of translating poetic works into English so that we're more exposed to these different styles, and different sort of starting points for writing poetry. So I love that about my work. I love working with people on their creative pieces. I have worked with some people on short stories and experimental prose pieces as well. So that's an exciting edge for me of how do you bring 10 or 20 years of deep academic and fieldwork experience to creative expression. That's a really dynamic and fun and fascinating edge for me. And I think often is what is missing in most academic fields is that creative expression. So it's really enriched me and my work as a poet. I have another series of poems that I've been working on called Inside Empire that are more socio-political. And my heart connection in those poems is really to Israel's devastating genocide in Gaza and trying to find a common humanity with the people of Gaza and literally the land. Like, how can we connect to each other across these differences and divides through the land, through animals, through our hearts, and share a common humanity? So that's a long series of poems I've been working on for a while. So it's helped me as well. You know, there's always a conversation between sort of what I'm doing as a poetry editor and what I'm writing myself.
And are there any other projects in poetry that you're currently working on or writing in general? Before we started recording, you also told me that you have started a YouTube channel.
Yeah, well, in 2008, I was the poet in residence over at the Gilpin Library here. And that was fantastic. That was a wonderful experience. And since then, Larry Greco ran poetry readings there. And then I did a few after he retired. And those were just absolutely wonderful and fantastic to connect with all the brilliant poets up here. And my partner, Stith Bennett, has a studio. And so we've had Blue Marmot gatherings of poetry and music there. And so that's been another venue that's just absolutely wonderful, and I love having music be part of it as well. And yeah, otherwise, I've done readings, down on the flats, as we say, down in Boulder and Denver. The pandemic obviously interrupted a lot of that for a few years, and I haven't gotten back to it as much. But I did start a YouTube channel, just Christine Weeber, and I have one video up, so there's more coming. But I recorded at Stith's studio with Richard Turco, a local musician who's just phenomenal. And he does improv. And so he'll play to my reading just off the cuff. And it's absolutely just, I feel like it brings my work to a totally new level. So we have more recordings that Stith's working on. And then we eventually want to get back in the studio and do some more. So hopefully those are in the queue and those will be up on YouTube next little while.
And yeah, is there anything else in general that you want to add before we sign off?
I think to anyone listening, I just want to encourage creative expression and freedom in whatever form it takes. I feel like the pressures of late stage capitalism and the political situation that's going on right now can be so just literally depressing. I mean, you might feel depressed, but it's also kind of depressing. And I've been thinking about this in part, it's because it's so reductionist. It's so simplistic that our art, our music, our paintings, our sculptures can be resistance just in the way that they humanize and build in spaces of complexity and nuance and depth. And I feel like that's often what's missing in authoritarian governments. My own research for my master's degree was with South Africans who had moved to Colorado. And so I spent a lot of time reading and understanding and thinking about apartheid. And for the artists under apartheid, there was a similar tension. Do we just respond to what's happening right now? And that's so urgent. At the same time, some people resisted that push toward political poetry or political writing, playwrights saying, we want to write to the human experience and the human depth and the human condition more broadly. And so those aren't easy conversations. And I think every artist figures out in any moment kind of where they want to fall. I think like Bob Dylan was a huge influence to me as well. And some of his work is very political and some of it's just like off the cuff and corny. And some of it's brilliant about these deeper issues of just being human in these times, And so, yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us on this local poetry spotlight episode of the Mountaineer Podcast, Christine. For more information about her and her work, be sure to head to our website at christineweber.com. And be sure to head to the Sapiens website, sapiens.org. Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in to this episode of the Mountaineer Podcast. I'll be back very soon with our final local poetry spotlight of 2025. In the meantime, if you want to share this episode or others around with whoever you see fit, then be sure to head to the mtnear.com and scroll near to the bottom, or head to our podcast's main hub at the mtnearpodcast.buzzsprout.com to see a full archive of all of our episodes. If you're interested in getting involved in any way, shape, or form in the podcast, then be sure to email info@themountaineer.com and or media@themountaineer.com, and we'll get something sorted for you. And finally, be sure to check out all of our important links, including our Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and primary website by heading to an individual episode description of our podcast. While you're down there, you can also send us a text and let us know what you think of the podcast and or the paper. We'd love to hear from you. I'm going to sign off this episode a little differently than usual. I'm going to let Christine sign us off for the final moments of this podcast. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Have a great rest of your day.
I could read a couple more poems if you want.
Yeah.
So this one is from a collection that the Nederland Library has, and it's called In the Understory of Her Being. This is a series of love poems inspired by Pablo Neruda's book of love poems. And so my good friend Pilar Perez Serrano translated these poems into Spanish. And so I can read the English and the Spanish. 9. Garter snakes sleep in curled, dewy leaves of night. The end, the beginning of what we both lost. White flannel sheets, sandy, twisted, binding ankles, thighs, folds of skin and wetness. Hands reach for the clay of mortal shadows, curling instants of fingertips entering. What ground underneath us except all ground? Tongues, desperate, alabasters search for the sculptor's wear, flying through solar systems, moons, blue mountain shadows, to get to you, to this. Your slow eyes now, here in this skin. I am afraid of time, of slipping, of the one blade of grass dipping in the moonlight. 9. Culebras enrolladas que duermen, hojas rociadas de noche. El final, el comienzo de lo que ambos perdimos. Sábanas de franella arenosas retorcidas, elizando tobillos, muslos, arrugas de piel y humedad. Manos que alcanzan el barro de sombras mortales. Yemas que se meten y se enroscan en el acto. ¿Qué tierra bajo nosotros, sino toda la tierra? Lenguas desesperadas, alabastro que busca al escultor y a su desgaste. Sobrevolando sistemas solares, la luna, sus sombras de montañas azules, para llegar a ti, a esto. Tú, ojos lentos, ahora, aquí y en esta piel. Temo al tiempo y a respirar, y a la brizna de hierba zambuida en la luz de la luna.
And that's it for our show. Subscribe online to get more access to more news, weekly updates to our community calendar, and a link to our YouTube channel by visiting themountaineer.com. Be sure to use the coupon code PODCAST when subscribing for a 10% discount, only available to our listeners. If you are in the local Peak-to-Peak area, be sure to pick up a print edition of The Mountaineer at a local business. I'm Dango Rose. Thank you for listening.